Welcome to this Fane Online event. I'm Nikita Gill, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Karen McCarthy Woolf, Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, who is the author of two poetry collections and the editor of 7 literary anthologies. She was shortlisted for the Forward, Felix Dennis, and Jerwood Prizes for her debut, An Aviary of Small Birds, which was also an Observer Book of the Year. Her second book, Seasonal Disturbances, explores gentrification, the city, and the sacred, and it was a winner in the inaugural Laurel Prize for Ecological Poetry and excerpted in the Financial Times and The Guardian. Karen also writes for radio, and recent highlights include a multi-authored adaptation of Virginia Woolf's Orlando, which was nominated for a BBC Audio Award in 2020, and a reversioning of Homer's Book of the Dead, in which Odysseus is reimagined as a London cab driver for BBC Radio 4's Book of the Week. Her debut novel in verse, Top Doll, which we will be talking about today, is out on the 18th of January and is one of my biggest recommendations of 2024. She's a Fulbright scholar, a brilliant teacher, a phenomenal, essential poet, and debut novelist who I'm privileged to call my friend. Thank you for joining us, Karen.
Oh, thank you, Nikita. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I am so excited about Top Doll, and to let everyone who is watching know what this amazing book is about. When reclusive billionaire Huguette Clark dies at age 104, she leaves behind a suite of New York apartments, a meticulously upkept California mansion, at least one Monet, and her vast collection of antique dolls. Having barely been outside for 50 years, the elusive Clark spoke to few. In this highly unreliable, semi-fictional miniature epic, the dolls tell us all. Theirs is a tale that takes us from their lavish Park Avenue home back in time to the slave plantations of Virginia and the palaces of imperial Japan via the addictive hedonism of 1930s queer LA. What an amazing, like, that just yanked me right in. It's one of those books that you really, really can't put down once you start reading it. It's so brilliant. So, should we start by talking about who Huguette Clark was?
Well, yeah. So I came across her via her obituary. That's when I first discovered that she existed. And of course, we've had a lot of, Howard Hughes, the famous reclusive billionaire character. But I knew nothing about her. She spent the last 20 years of her life in this hospital room in New York. Prior to that, she was in her apartment. It was a 42-room apartment because she was very, very rich. She inherited all her money from her father, William Clark. William Clark was a senator. It was said that he bought his seat in the Senate. He kind of like he was the son. He was kind of like, he was the self-made man. He was the classic self-made man. He studied geology. He was one of those kind of original kind of like, he'd be out there trekking across the plains, really looking, he was a miner, not one that went down a mine, but somebody that would discover the mines, the minerals, the metals. He made his fortune in copper. So he was
Wow.
literally, when they made those little pennies, those little copper cents, that was him. An interesting fact, Las Vegas is in Clark County. And
Wow.
yeah, named after him. She grew up in Montana. She had a sister, Andre. Andre died of meningitis when she was 16. That was something that really was deeply traumatic. Obviously, the sisters were close. I mean, they lived in this Park Avenue mansion, which was so big that they actually built a train track to bring in fuel to heat it. They actually
That's incredible.
to come in. Yeah. I mean, it was lavish beyond, kind of anything. If you think of those, kind of, but at the same time, the Clarks were never really kind of seen like the Vanderbilts, the Astors, all those big families. Um, they weren't really quite seen like that. I mean, I think maybe because he didn't leave much to charity.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
because he didn't leave much to charity, this is why. But essentially, he was like this sort of archetypal, the robber baron
Yes.
club. They were fabulously rich. And if we think of now today, those sort of billionaires that we have,
Yeah.
sort of like that sense of the nouveau riche and very, very flamboyant. Anyway, so Andre, the sister, dies. Huguette marries, and it doesn't go well, this marriage. She's shy. She doesn't like the limelight. There's a terrible photograph taken of her on board a sort of steamer on her honeymoon. The
Mm,
marriage doesn't last. And actually, the reason given was because, of course, when you went for your divorce in Reno, which was what she did,
mm.
um, and you have to give a reason, and the reason was non-consumption, not consumption, consummation, forgive me,
Oh,
non-consummation. So she was this sort of like, and at the same time, she sort of had all her sort of dolls around her. And she was a great collector of dolls. Um,
yeah.
now she kind of gathered these in auction in lots of different ways, but there were some dolls that were with her from her childhood.
Right.
Um, and so when I saw this, I literally just became so fascinated by this person that surrounded themselves in this way, that created their own world.
Mm,
But yet, was, I mean, crazily, fantastically rich. There was a huge court case after she died because she left $40 million to her nurse. She didn't have much surviving family. Um,
right.
Interesting thing, her father, William Clark, just to give you the family scenario,
Yeah.
her father was 57 when he met his second wife, her mother, who was
Oh,
kind of like half French Canadian,
I see.
and she was 17. Uh,
Gosh.
yeah, and this is actually an age difference that was mirrored later by Huguette's half brother, William Clark Jr.,
Mm.
um, who had been married, but then had a long-standing queer relationship. Um, as I said, he was a
Gosh.
hedonist, and anyway, he died in the arms of a 17-year-old boy. So there you go.
Wow.
These two levels of age difference. So anyway, it was, once you start looking into the story, it was
Yeah.
utterly fascinating. So that is Huguette in this apartment on her own. She had like a 42-room apartment in New York on the 12th floor. And then on the 8th floor was her mother in another 42-room apartment. Park Avenue.
Wow.
Incredible. Um,
Just wildly wealthy. And I think that I went down a bit of a rabbit hole myself when I
yeah,
started reading.
yeah,
I think she had like an original Degas that was stolen while she was at hospital and later found by the FBI, which
there,
is a
there was
wild, wild story again.
Yeah, and actually, one of the interesting things about Huguette Clark is that she loved to make art, actually. She was fascinated with animation. I mean, she had this nursemaid. So, the book is this mix between fact and fiction. I mean, because, my characters are dolls, and we'll leave Huguette in a sec, but I would just sort of say, this is the kind of level of eccentricity in the world that she created. She had a housemaid, and she was paid to do all the things in the house, but one of her
Yeah.
tasks was to transcribe every single episode of the Flintstones,
Oh my
because
God, yes.
wanted to get the script and look at animation. She loved doing that. She loved to paint. She was actually like really quite a nice portrait painter. She did some portraits of the dolls. Yeah, so um, my lead character, so let's get on to the dolls. My lead
Yes.
character, Dolly, um, is a porcelain doll.
Yes. Yeah.
She's porcelain. She's been with Maman, which is what she
Yeah.
calls Huguette, and what most of the dolls call Huguette.
Yeah.
And she's been with her since childhood. So in Dolly's
Is,
view, in her world, you know, she is the original.
so is Dolly the first doll for our
The
listeners and
very
viewers?
first, you know, she's amongst the first, I would
Yeah.
say. You know,
Yeah.
she is the um I mean, in some ways, yes, why not? She is the first doll. She is the only doll. She is the ultimate doll.
Yes, that's right. Because Dolly speaks with a French accent, doesn't she? And she speaks some French along the way. When did Huguette get Dolly?
Well, you know, the thing is, um, so I forgot a little bit out of the very expansive biography. Basically, um, so this 17-year-old that who
Yes,
gets father
yes,
eventually married.
yes,
Whether he was married when her sister Andre, who was a little bit older, a couple of years older, was born, we don't know. But I said that she was kind of like this, she had this kind of like French Canadian background. And at that time, you know, remember, this is the end of the 19th century, it's the fin de siècle. Paris is wildly fashionable. So she was kind of like Frenchish, I would say, you know, this sort of French
yes,
Canadianish.
yeah,
um, and so, and they spent a lot of time in Paris. And so
yes,
Huguette spoke fluent French, as did her sister
mm,
and her mother. And they spent a lot of time there. And they were very kind of keyed into this kind of like, you know, kind of whole European sensibility. So this is
yes,
why Dolly speaks French. And Dolly is
mm,
essentially, you know, so she's sort of French American, and whether there's a trace of London in her, like inadvertently, but ideally not. But when I wanted to get the voice for Dolly, one of the things I did Nikita, it was kind of like a sort of early AI experiment sort of
yeah,
thing. Because I mean, you know, it was a while back when I was working on her voice. But
yeah,
one of the things I did was I would write a line um,
yes,
of the little sonnets, which is what she speaks in, would write
yes,
a line, and then I would put it into Google Translate,
yes.
and then I would translate it to French.
Oh, that's amazing. I
Yeah.
think I was going to come to this because you've already mentioned the sonnets. But what I really loved about this book, particularly as a poet, is the structure, which included the found poems which made up the obituaries. And we'll come to the obituaries in a minute because that was where your fascination started as well, isn't it? And you've got memoir in there, you've got haikus, and of course, sonnets for Dolly, who I've got such a soft spot for,
Oh.
right? I love Dolly. Um, it would be so great to talk about the structure of the book and how long it took you to write it and where the interest for you started in the story.
Yeah, well, you know, it came together piece by piece, and I like to think of it, you're not really getting this linear narrative. Anyone that knows me knows that's not really how I work. I move around. So essentially, I think of it like a disco glitter ball. And the story comes together like a glitter ball in a disco. And, you know, when you have little bits of it, and different narrators give you different parts, different angles, different sparkles. Um, and they all have different desires, and they all have different reasons for telling their story.
Mm,
Um, One of the things that really fascinated me was that Huguette lived, she was born in 1906, she died in 2011.
mm,
You know,
mm.
104, she lived a whole century. She lived actually through three centuries, 19th, 20th, and 21st. Think about that,
That's
a
rare.
lifetime that goes through that. But yet, you never leave the house. It's like such a crazy contradiction, right? I
Maybe,
was
maybe that's why she lived so long. She didn't go outside.
Well, yeah, I mean, that didn't prove to be so healthy for her because she didn't get
Mm,
enough sunlight, Although she actually did love sunbathing. So when she was young, they went to Hawaii, and this was one of the great highlights. And, you know, there's a couple of great biographies actually on Huguette Clark for anyone that wants, you know, like background reading. But anyway, you know, so she loved to sunbathe and all of this, but then she never left the house. And when she did finally leave the house to go to this hospital, she basically had skin cancer. Or as Dolly calls it, carcinoma nasty, because that's Dolly's way of talking. And she becomes incredibly concerned about this, and wants to cure it. And she wants to cure it with this stuff called cherry blossom powder. And she makes it into a paste and she puts it on Maman's cheek at night. You know, she wants to, you know, she is nurturing this woman. To what avail, we can't be quite sure, but I mean, eventually Maman will have to go to the hospital, and this is kind of like where the story takes up. But while I was writing, and just in terms of the different characters, so I thought about this idea that we have this whole century, and then you think about America, and then I thought about, you know, dolls as iconic beings. And so I thought, I don't just want this, you know, porcelain fantasy. We need some other dolls that, you know, kind of represent. And also, you know, Dolly, much as I adore her, you know, like, I wondered if we might be able to have the whole, you know, could the whole thing be in her voice, or did other dolls have things to say? So you have a lovely you know, who's one of my, I don't have any favorites, of course. So, Miss Ting, who is a Jamaican rag doll.
I love Miss Ting. Miss Ting's amazing. Like, she was like when I was sitting there and reading, because she speaks in patois, doesn't she?
She does.
And
Yeah.
it's just so amazing. There's something very rich about reading it on the page. I love that. That was so powerful. And I'm so glad you included Miss Ting because, oh.
Yeah. You know, like, I forgot, didn't I? I was gonna like, I did get her. I'm just, hold on 1 minute.
This is very exciting because there are a bunch of things which are going to come up. Like there are a few synchronicities
Okay.
that we're going to talk about soon. So
I just had to do that. There she is. I forgot Miss Ting.
there she is. We're so excited that you have like Miss
I'm gonna
Ting
stay there now.
with
Just try
you,
to keep an eye on things, make sure everything runs to plan.
which is what she's like. That is what she's like, isn't she? We've spoken a little bit about Dolly, and I think it would be so great to hear a little reading from Dolly's voice to give everyone a flavor of her character.
Okay, I'm going to just read a bit from the beginning. And the only thing I would say is, you know, when I put that Dolly's voice into the Google Translate into French, I then translated it back into English to try and get this kind of little sort of mixed up kind of like, it looks like a sort of, I think of it as like a sort of junglist aesthetic, you know, like hip hop
Yes.
sample. Anyway, it's got little bits of French, it's got English. Dolly is welcoming the reader to the house. And the thing is, Nikita, you know, she kind of very much moves back in time, and then she'll sort of like take you around the house, and then she goes into the present again, and then she takes you back. Yeah, so Dolly didn't get on very well with Mr. Husband, obviously. She wasn't really that impressed by Mr. Husband and his role in Maman's life. So this kind of this is her sort of harking back, which would have been to the sort of 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, well, via the 1960s, because she does move around like that glitter ball. Dolly must wait 30 years to fly across the Atlantic. First class. This is Pan Am's 1960s. Ooh la la. I feel a rush of breath. This booby next to me was soft flesh, not fragile like my porcelain cheeks. If only poor maman could have come. If only she was bisque. She would be hollow and happy, like us. Please note this moose head, dear guest, in our house, in our maison. Dear guest, I ask at takeoffs, why did we bring this chatty talkative? Cherry blossom lends a charm to existence. I am having this on my bureau. In Paris, it is considered très chic. But we are using more each week. Le Général urges calm like a lake, not a sea. What does he know? He was not the one whose head was not on its neck. No, he is having a big woolly head on his neck with ears that go deaf when I shush him because he is speaking but saying nothing. Alors, you see les plastiques in their discotheque with a 2-inch glitter ball? Everyone expects the globe of Dolly. Let me speak you something. It is not rocket mathematics. Écoutez bien. Maman's Mr. Husband was tippling over the deck like martini from a cocktail glass. Now I speak of Paris. On this flight, one subordinate, servant class, tries to stuff Dolly in the overhead locker like a coffin. No air, no light. Then I blink and she is embarrassed. She and the cabin stewards glance nervously and laugh, then lift my head so I too can see the sun's fire. Every cloud has a silvery line. Maman will fire this subordinate when we get home. I'll bet they are not speaking of this lady in my seat, first class. Chatty talkative is down in the hold. Ha, ha. Now her teeth, they are chattering. I admire her stamina, if nothing else. The least I could do was to tell Maman of the letter. You see, Mr. Husband made hush-hush inquiry to sell us at Christie's auction house, as if. May, this is how my pretty tete was broken. On that day, many years ago, my head, it spins and twists like horses on the multicolored carousel. This abominable was no joker. Poor Dolly, my skin was icing white bisque. We then have an episode where Dolly goes to the doctor in Paris and ends up on this massive sort of like bizarre glue trip. But yeah.
That's what I love about the book. Yes, it does have like grief and loss because that is a big part of Huguette's life and the dolls' lives by extension. But it is such a joyously funny, raucous book as well. I love that. And I love you reading your readings. I hope we get an audiobook soon because I really think that you would just, all the voices, you would just bring to life so beautifully, which would be a real joy to listen to. You mentioned in the reading, Dolly talks about cherry blossom powder, and you mentioned it before as well. Can we talk a little bit about what the cherry blossom powder is and what are these healing properties that she mentions?
Well, on the label, it says cherry blossom powder brings a charm to existence. And Dolly thinks that that's really what's required. She needs a charm. She needs magic. She needs Maman to live. She sees it as a cure-all. You know, when you're sort of bureau, do you remember, I don't know, I remember my grandma and these sort of classic things from the 50s. You know, you would have these little powder puffs and there'd be pink powder and powder their face and powder their nose and this and that. Anyway, Dolly thinks that she can get rid of this massive hole in Maman's face. She's in her, mid-80s at the point where she goes to the hospital and she's really sick and she's very emaciated as well, poor thing. Anyway, so this cherry blossom powder, Dolly decides is the thing that's going to cure her. She's got some in her little bureau, little Dolly bureau. It's probably smaller than that, isn't it? And she makes it up and she applies it to Maman's face, but they need more. And this is where the Barbies get involved because the Barbies feel like, well, did I mention there were Barbies? don't know if I did
You
yet.
haven't mentioned it yet, no, but
The Barbies, of course, there are Barbies, and Barbies live there. They are they're kind of like the doll hive mind. They have many different Barbies. They're all real Barbies. And they get involved because they think that they've got scientists, they've got everything, they've got everything, haven't they, with their whole world. So they think they can manufacture this cherry blossom powder. But it turns out that this cherry blossom powder is very popular in the disco, sort of like a side product, because they make a lot and they have loads of it. But, you know, supply, demand,
yeah, yeah,
forces, all of those things. So very soon we find that lots of the dolls are very keen to get this charm to existence, cherry blossom powder, this wonderful little pep you up cure-all. They love it. Can't get enough of it. Anyway, so that's cherry blossom powder. And cherry blossom actually has this sort of other aspect to it, which connects us to another doll, which is a Japanese doll
yes,
called Lady Mamiko. And Huguette Clark was this kind of Japanophile. Of course, she'd never been to Japan. I mean, she did go to Hawaii, but I don't think she never went to Japan. But she was, so fascinated by the art and many aspects of the culture. She loved manga, so she loved
yes,
the cartoons, all of these things. And so, anyway, she had many Japanese dolls.
yeah,
And so the cherry blossom season, and she was very particular, Huguette Clark, very particular about being accurate.
yes.
She used to get the dolls' clothes from Dior.
Yeah.
Seriously, she would have handmade clothes from Dior. She's a
Did
billionaire.
did you send did you mention that she also sent them first class?
Yes, that bit from the story is apparently true. Some dolls crossed the Atlantic first class in
Wow.
seats. So I sort of thought, if I was charged to take some dolls across the Atlantic in a first class seat, I might be the one sitting in it. But yeah, don't tell Dolly. Um, so anyway, cherry blossom powder is this kind of like, this substance they're all crazy for. The
Yes.
Barbies are making it. But there are different people that you want their hands in it. And the Japantown, because there's a big Japanese like area of this whole 42-room department, and some of it gives way to Japantown. And
Wow.
Japantown, yeah, has many buildings, and they have kabuki theater, and it has this kind of Dolly really looks up to Lady Mamiko because she's an aristocrat. She's a
Yeah,
Japanese aristocrat. So of
yeah,
course Dolly, and she's porcelain as well.
yeah, yeah. Which
Um,
Dolly loves. Dolly puts at
yeah.
a very high value, doesn't she?
Porcelain
The
is the
porcelains versus the plastics.
yes. Oh yeah, porcelain is the top of the tree.
Mm,
But rag also has a very, very special place uh,
absolutely.
in the whole scenario.
I
Um,
I do think this leads us to the first synchronicity, which
oh
is connected to Lady Mamiko, and I would love for you to tell us about that.
yeah, well, you mentioned that I was a Fulbright scholar, and when I went to LA, I went to UCLA, and I was involved. I was a writer in residence at an amazing human rights institute, the Promise Institute for Human Rights. I'm writing very serious poems. But I was always thinking about the dolls because they were always my little back burner project. The thing is that Huguette Clark had a massive mansion in Santa Barbara, huge. And it was kept immaculately. No one ever went there, but there was staff probably doing what they were doing in the first class seats, sort of going, oh, yes, it's all ready for you when you come. Whatever they were doing, I mean, hope so. Anyway, so, and some of the family was in California. Anyway, so I'm at UCLA. I'm I'm busy researching human rights. Um, and I get a little email in my box and it says, oh, Huguette Clark's doll collection is up for auction in Santa Barbara. I'm like, oh my
Oh
God,
my
I can't
God.
believe it. It's a 2-hour drive from LA, 2, 3 hour, whatever, to Santa Barbara from LA. It's just up the road. Um, I was like, when is it? It was like, it's in 3 days on Saturday. This is Wednesday. I was like, oh my God, I've got to go. I've got to go. So I drove up to Santa Barbara. I'm in this hotel. Every doll collector worth her salt, because it is mainly
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
Every doll collector worth her salt is there. You know, get the catalogue. I go into this room. It's a 12 hours of auction. Okay. I mean, I'm literally there from morning till night and surrounded by all these dolls that had lived their life with Huguette Clark
Oh
in
my
the
God.
apartment. I just couldn't believe it. So as soon as I walked in, I was like, oh my God. I was like, Dolly's here. I know she's here. I'll be able to find her, you know, whatever. I did find her. She's a fascinating, I knew instantly as soon as I saw her. I was like, oh, I was almost a little bit scared, you know, to see her in real life. And I thought, oh, do you think I'll be able to buy Dolly? But Dolly went for $28,000.
Penny for a doll, 28,000.
Yeah, I mean, don't let her know I told you, but basically that was the highest amount that some of the dolls went for. But you know, Dolly obviously was the most unique doll.
Mm. Mm.
And yeah, 28,000. I was like, okay. So a little bit later, one of
Yes.
the more, how can I say it, mysterious and enigmatic dolls came along. And she was a Japanese doll, Japanese porcelain, very beautiful. And I managed to buy her.
You
Yeah,
own one of Huguette Clark's dolls.
I do. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I hadn't actually envisaged Lady Mamiko as a character until I got this doll. And then, you know, so then I started to write the Lady Mamiko character and think about what might happen in Japantown, how Japantown might relate to the other realms of the doll kingdom, because there's Barbieville Disco,
Mm.
there's Japantown, and then there's the area where the porcelain lives, you know, the porcelains, and there were many, many porcelains, and automata and other rarities.
I just think that's so amazing that like it just is such a synchronicity that you were able to go and you were able to see her doll collection, which is incredible. And you were still writing this book at the time because how
Yes.
long did you spend writing this book,
I've
Karen?
always been like, it's so kind of like it did take a long time because it's coming out now. Here we are,
Yeah.
January 2024. And you'll note that I said that I first got interested when I read her obituary in 2011. So it's
Yeah.
10 years, oh God, well, from publication, but writing around 10 years from the initial inception through to the final manuscript.
But this is what is so powerful about this book is there is so much in it because it is a period piece because it's set in 91 when she
Yeah.
goes to hospital, right?
Yeah.
But through the dolls, we visit so many different time periods. And that's what I like to say about the book is that the dolls have a foot in the past, but also in the present. So it navigates this very interesting narrative structure that goes up and down between these two very different places and it takes us all over the world really and that's what I loved and I think this kind of takes us to our next synchronicity involving the general.
Oh,
Yes.
so the general's a rag doll,
Yes. Yes.
and he's writing his memoirs,
Mm.
and he's lived a life, and he's got stuff to tell.
Mm.
He's not been in this apartment that long, um, and he actually started life on a plantation, a small plantation in Virginia,
Mm.
um, in the kind of like early about 1864, around 1864. Um, and he was made for a character called Eliza Brown. Now, this is where the fact and fiction all starts to blur, because I remember I told you it's highly unreliable. You know, what's true, what's not, we don't know. But the truth, you know, dolls know the truth.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
one of the things about the book is that I sort of thought about that, you know, like they kind of like they connect to our dreams, they connect to our fears, they
Mm.
connect to our inner world, to our
Mm.
subconscious. They know our subconscious very, very well. And they know us well because of that. And they are creatures that discern what they know from the body, the mind and the heart. Anyway, the general is made for Eliza Brown, who was the cook for General Custer, who was a Union officer in the Civil War. She runs away from the plantation. Eliza runs away from the plantation and she ends up in a contraband camp. And this contraband camp, many runaway slaves, went to the camps. And Eliza goes there and decides to try her luck, to do something new. But what I haven't said is that in the actual records of this Eliza Brown's real, where she really lived on the plantation, they always listed all the enslaved people because they were, property as listed, the inventory. And in that inventory, there was a boy, a mixed race boy, who was listed as a mulatto. Now, Eliza is not said to be his mother, but it's possible that she could have been his mother. We don't know. And so, but in the story, she is very much his, this little baby John's mother. And so the general is made for baby John. Maybe I could, shall I try?
Yes, please, if you could do a reading from the general's voice, that would be wonderful.
I hope I've introduced him in a manner. Now, the only other thing I might say is that he's kind of like, these memoirs are very serious, and because it's an important story to tell.
He's a serious writer.
He is. Oh my God, what's happening? You know that moment, Nikita, where you've got all your things in the book and you go, oh yeah, here it is. And then you go, oh yeah, here it is.
There we go.
Okay, so this is the general. Okay, I have to get my general face on, Reminiscences and recollections of General Obadiah Louverture Little Rock Yellowbird Jr. II. A memoir. General Obadiah Louverture Little Rock Yellowbird Jr. II. That is my full, unabridged, and endowed name. And it is a hitherto undisclosed fact that the general, as referred to, is not George Armstrong Custer, the gonorrhea-ridden Union Army officer with whom Eliza found her life entwined, but another more appropriate warrior. Toussaint Louverture, general, Jacobin noir, and revolutionary extraordinaire, who had led the incarcerated of Haiti into that historic and victorious rebellion all those centuries ago. He who liberated our land of the high priestess Mannequin clan, where the veil between soft flesh and dull hide was worn thin as any hand-me-down Sunday best, where a fat moon blazed its path through tavern windows in flickering candlelight, as marauding pirates and press-ganged sailors swigged draughts by the dozen, blind to the true identities of the grinning revolutionaries and buxom maroons who surrounded them on stealthy reconnaissance, so as to gather muskets and coordinates through the intoxicated waggling of ale and rum-loosened tongues. This was a lush and prolific island where legions of martyr mannequins sacrificed arms, legs, lungs, and necks as cushions for carefully placed pins to help bring a nation of whip wielders to its knees. Grandmammy Bessie stitched the history into my striped breeches and matching dicky bow from a worn waistcoat she'd wheedled out of old miser Price. Gollywog, I think not, my friend, for it is I, General Obadiah Louverture, Little Rock Yellowbird Jr. II, who was the prototype. Those mawkish minstrels were a facsimile of me, of every black flesh fashioned rag mannequin. It was Grandmammy Bessie herself who collected used cloths and horsehair from the manes and tails of prized palominos from which to stuff me. She who haggled hard for those 2 matching ivory buttons at the haberdashery, as the top right corner of the back section in the general store was somewhat grandiosely titled. A little piece of Africa, she'd muttered under her breath, as the needle pierced her fingertip for blood that dripped upon the cloth, and she fastened tight the thread.
Mm. I love that when you talk about the different voices in the book, and we've already discussed that the porcelains are, or they see themselves right on top, and then it's the rag dolls. And there's this conversation that this is a mention in there from the general about being a rag doll, and not a gollywog, which, I think is such a crucial point there, where it comes to the history of dolls. I think you mentioned that you went to a convention.
Well, this was what we were calling, wasn't it, our second synchronicity? And
Mm.
oh my God, yeah. So is it the second synchronicity or not? I can't remember. No, there's another one, isn't there? Anyway, there were many synchronicities. But essentially, um, yeah, when I was in LA, not only when I was in California, I was only there for 6 months. Um,
Yes.
not only was Huguette Clark's doll collection auctioned, but the 39th biannual, I think it's biannual, yeah, the 39th biannual Black Doll Show took place in LA. And this is where all, America's black doll makers, rag doll makers, all sorts of different dolls, but black dolls. This is where they kind of go, and it's an exhibition, and you can see all the dolls that the doll makers make. And while I was there, I had already kind of like fashioned the general in my mind. He was already a speaking character. But and I kind of like thought I don't want him. I mean, for a start, the history of the Gollywog actually doesn't it actually comes out of Holland.
Yes. Yes.
It's not from the US, this doll. And I really also, wanted, this character of a kind of a very sort of noble character in many ways. I mean, he's noble, but
Mm.
he's also sort of like he's just a doll. And
But they've all got notions, don't they? All of them.
yeah. And so like, I just really wanted this rag doll to be much more in the tradition of a real black doll,
Yeah.
made by a black woman for her grandson. Um, and for that, that's his provenance. Provenance is very important in this doll world, where you come from, who made you, how many of you might there be, all of those things in this universe. And but at the heart of the general's voice, Nikita, and it's kind of, I think, important because this idea of the voice and the memoir, and thinking about the great memoirs, slave memoirs, Frederick Douglass, Olaudah Equiano. And so, in a way, this is this sort of voice that, the general imagines that his story, exists in. This is its realm. And he's kind of telling that narrative, but from a doll perspective, and then also giving us this insight, because his life is long. I mean, 1860. He's older than you get. So he goes through the Civil War with Eliza, this feisty cook,
Yes.
and run away, and then he had to live with General Custer and his wife, and this is just an interesting aside because, you know, he is literally plagued, plagued by, the general is plagued by dogs because Custer lived with, at one point they would be on the camp, you know, in the sort of army camps. And you think about this kind of like, you're in the American West. And they had like 40, they had a huge menagerie, 40 dogs, huge dogs, hunting dogs, wolfhounds, you know, lurchers, you know, they had all kinds of every sort of dog. And also kind of like squirrels and all kind of critters, I think like critters in general. And, you know, being a doll and being a rag doll, you know, dogs quite like that. So he does spend a lot of his time sort of like trying to get away from these dogs that are sort of snuffling around him, making his life a misery, poor old general, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
but I think what's amazing about the general is that he still keeps his humor about him. He really does. I know he's quite pompous, but he does keep his humor about him whilst going through quite difficult times. And we talked about right at the beginning about the different Americas that we see. What's very interesting about the general as well, but also because I have such a soft spot for her, is Miss Ting. You know, and if you could tell us about like the general and Miss Ting's relationship a little bit more, that would be good.
oh, well, yeah, you know, because they've had a little ting going on for a while. Yeah, so you know, Miss Ting is the you know, it's her veranda that he goes to drink sarsaparilla or a little bit of rum punch, and he's the one that, as you might put it, looks after her pum pum nicely, and he does all of that. You know, he's you know, he's a little bit of a Romeo as well. You know,
Yes.
he's that kind of guy, and but you know, he's popular. He's a very popular guy. He's
Yeah.
popular in he's popular in Barbieville Disco. Very popular in Barbieville Disco. Miss Thing's not so keen on that. And Dolly, you know, Dolly's got these kind of like slightly, you know, romantic ideas about her, but Miss Thing's under no, you know, illusions as to worry about that. But whether or not she's sort of happy with the Barbies, you know, kind of writhing all over him, you know, on the
Yeah.
floor. I don't think
Yeah.
she's keen on that. And he also does like to DJ in the disco. So he likes to play a bit of, I mean, it's 1991, so he likes to play a bit of 90s ragga, you know. He plays
Yeah. Yeah.
like Shabba Ranks, and Miss Ting loves that, you know. Those are actually her tunes. She loves that. She likes a bit of night, you know, Shabba Ranks, yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I love that you've come to the Barbies because I think the Barbies they were such a great addition to the book because they don't speak a lot and it's each one is a different Barbie that speaks. It starts with obviously we'll come to her, but we've got like Moscow Barbie, we've got Indian Barbie, we've got like Dr. Barbie, we've got all of these Barbies who come in and they're quite humorous, but I think they're also strangely very self-aware. So where did you get this idea to put the Barbies in there?
Well, I mean, yeah, for ages. Okay, so for ages I was like, oh, God's sake, no. I don't want these Barbies. You know, they've had their, you know, they get enough exposure. You know, everybody
Yeah.
knows about Barbie, what she's got to say in the world, da da da. And this was ages before the film, remember, because I was thinking
Yeah.
about this book for a long time, a decade. And I was like, oh no, I'm not going to let the Barbies speak. I don't think, why would they have anything to say in this? And it's all about the other dolls. Anyway, I don't know how one of them finally managed to get through. It was probably a great concentration of the Barbie hive mind.
Yeah.
Because, oh, mind hive, yeah, mind hive, whatever, those two things. Because like somehow they got through to me. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I know a lot of writers say this, Nikita, but when you're really deep in a character,
Mm.
there is this level. People always go, as channeling, you know, I'm just picking, but you do kind of, you're like deep within it, and you're like, well, you know, these Barbies, they do have something to say. So I wrote one Barbie, and I can't remember which one it was. And at the time, I think I'd been reading, I don't know if it was Shani Dashi, someone had some poems, and they
Mm.
were in these ABCD form. I was like, oh, look at that. That's cute. And I was like, maybe I'm gonna write. So the ABCD is one where you have like, literally is 26 lines, and each line begins with A, B, C, D, E, F, G,
Um,
and that's how they work. Um,
mm,
and I thought, God, that actually seems like a perfect form for Barbie, you know? If
yeah.
Barbie's going to speak in a poem form, isn't it going to be one of these silly little ABCDeries with her, kind of archetypal self? And so that's the form that they spoke in. And then another friend of mine actually, the poet Roger Robinson, he said to me, "Well, like, why are you just letting one Barbie speak? Let them all speak. Let them all." Da, 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 da. And I was like, "Oh my God!" So once one got through the door, they were all there, like all
Stampeded in, a lot of them
Barbie
behind her.
o'clock. Yeah, it was Barbie o'clock, and then I was like, "Oh yeah,
Well, that's what I think is amazing as well, because it's not the Barbies just aren't just there because just to be there. You've used the Barbies to critique capitalism specifically. There's a lot of like themes of critiquing capitalism. There's a lot of themes in general in the book, but the way that you critique capitalism through the Barbies, through what Dolly says about them, where she says, "Oh, they're just mass produced." Um, I think that's worthy of like a bit of a conversation. You mentioned the robber barons, and we could talk a little bit more about that.
yeah." Well, yeah. I mean, I just kind of think, one of the things is that the Barbies are archetypes, and one of the difficulties was one of the challenges was to go, let's have an archetype, but like not just have a stereotype.
Mm,
But have somebody that's kind of archetypal to something, because they are often archetypal to a moment.
yes.
And they release each new ones each year, and then they have them from different nations. So
Yeah.
of course I had this sort of like opportunity to sort of play into all these kind of kind of national stereotypes and things
Mm,
like that. So you want to sort of play with that,
mm,
play with it,
yeah.
be kind of like a bit cheeky, a bit irreverent, um, and then also see if you can get like their voice and see how in that little disco ball narrative structure they can move the story on as well. But
Yeah.
then uh, yeah, I mean, I think in terms of capitalism, I mean, in some ways, and I mean, the Barbie movie itself,
Mm,
that kind of that touched upon that.
mm, mm.
I wouldn't say my Barbies are not PG,
No, they are not.
but what happens in Barbieville disco isn't, this is
No.
this is definitely a 15.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
niece is 11. She wants to read. I'm like, no, you can't possibly read this book, not with the stuff that goes on. No
Wait
way.
another 4 years, 5 years, maybe. We can
Yeah,
let you have
you
it
know what I
there.
mean? It's more of a 15 rating kind of thing. And but anyway, capitalism. Certainly, I'd be happy for her to read anything around that, because I think that that's essential. It's something that I mean, if you think about how sort of living with all this fabulous wealth,
Mm, mm.
and I say fabulous, it's fabulous for the very few people that have it, isn't it? And it's
Yes.
really built upon the on the backs, sweat, blood, tears, etc., of others. And as we know, that is absolutely entrenched in the history of the United States. That's
Mm.
something that the general touches upon, in quite a lot of detail. He also looks at the Indian Wars, the
Yes.
Custer Fort. He looks at yeah, I mean, so I really wanted to, kind of draw this picture. And if you think of America as a character in the book, to
Yes.
draw this picture of America and that character as something that it's a settler, capitalist, nation.
Mm.
Um, and that was very important for me, that we didn't just sort of see this gilded palace
Yes.
or something of what create, the exploitation that created that.
Yes. Yes.
And I think the Barbies are kind of like they're all different, and they've got their different politics,
Mm. Mm.
but they've got a boss. They've got a boss.
Yeah, they
Boss.
do. In fact, I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could, or you would be happy to share one of the Barbie poems from the book. And if I'm thinking of the one that you might be sharing, that would be amazing.
Well, yeah, the book is called Top Doll, and there are a lot of contenders.
Yes,
Not in Dolly's view, but there are contenders. This is CEO Barbie.
that's the one.
Again, CEO Barbie mood. And you could look her up, actually, she's fab. Now, as a senior business professional, I'm never without my briefcase, even at the beach. My polka dot bikini and cerise cravat tied in a pussy bow tucks between the lapels of my double-breasted power suit and my glossy stare. A chief executive must know how to delegate. I told Dolly, fax me, darling. I'll have my people look right into it. Crack the glass ceiling? Sure. I'm vintage 1985, a ball breaker, obviously headhunted. Cherry Blossom, that's my brand. This is my itinerary. Breakfast briefing. Let's do lunch. My dream job is right now. My desk faces the door. Feng Shui says killer heels should be sharp and pointed as a you're fired memo. Luck isn't relevant in business or politics. They're governed by market forces. Before my mom got real sick, Dolly negotiated a crazy deal with our head of production. I was obliged to overrule in the same way my role model, Nancy, kept President Reagan in check. I mean, everyone agrees his IQ was questionable, his PR skills slightly better. He even angled ROI on the Iran Contra affair. There's money in arms sales, but drugs are so much more effective in the long term, particularly when you declare war on them. Gear's ubiquitous as shoulder pads. All Dolly wants is a VIP guest list while I keep my head down under my wide brimmed hat. Our business plan involves a lot of Xanax, which was big back then. Anxiety is through the roof year on year. I took a lot from my corporate Bible, Sun Tzu's Art of War. It says, strike the weak, just like Ron and Nancy.
Oh, I love the Barbie so much, but CEO Barbie, I think, has to be one of my favorites. I think I've said that about every character, but my gosh, I this is such a remarkable book. And as you mentioned, the overarching mystery of the book is who is Top Dog? Who
Yeah.
is Top Dog? That's something that everyone who's watching needs to go and read the book to find out, you
Yeah.
know, who is Top Doll? Because that's something that's the thing that the dolls are constantly in competition with each other for as well, the idea of who is top doll. Well, Karen, I just want to say thank you so much for your grace and your energy and your time, and giving us this beautiful, beautiful conversation around this absolutely remarkable book written in the most remarkable way. So thank you so much, Karen. Talking to you always brings me so much joy.
Oh,
Uh,
Nikita, it's such fun. I want to do it more.
I know. I
Yeah.
wish we had like 2, 3 hours because there's so much in this book. Um, but thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so
know.
much.
I wanted you to read Indian Barbie.
Oh,
Oh, but
yeah. I one day we'll get together and I would love to.
okay,
I
we're
would
gonna
love to
get
read it.
together. We're gonna have a reading. You're gonna do some Indian Barbie. Oh my God, it'll be
Yes,
amazing.
it's gonna be wonderful.
It's been really fantastic to talk with you about the book. And thank you for keeping track of the swirl of the glitter ball, like move through all these different moments.
But I think there's so much to talk about as well. So it's like it was very hard, I think, to like kind of try to condense it at all, because again, it's a remarkable book written by a remarkable person, and I think we're all our viewers, they should immediately go and buy this book. I'm going to be literally shoving it into people's hands, going, "You have to read this." So it's going to be amazing.
Well,
Um,
girls would love that.
I'm telling you, everyone I know who was nuts about the Barbie movie needs to read this book because there is so much here.
It's kind of
Well,
like the X-rated flip side, isn't it? It's kind of like the X-rated version, a little.
that's correct. That's absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's the version that I think like more of the adults should read.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's the it's the version for adults because I think the Barbie movie is very much for a younger audience with a crossover, but this book is for all of the adults. It's the things that we needed to read, all of the themes, everything in there. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time today, Karen. You have been incredible as you always are. And thank you very much to our viewers for watching this wonderful Fane Online event.
Oh, thank you.